A blockbuster bombshell level settlement that was reached between the NFL and NFLPA yesterday revealed that the Denver Broncos, in my opinion, continue to have a leg up on the rest of the NFL in one particular category. The NBA draft kicks off tonight, and while the Nuggets don't have a pick, KSE Vice Chairman Josh Kroenke said some things about Nikola Jokic that were explosive and completely avoidable, if we're being honest. All things we will get into on today's rundown, but we will begin in the world of the NFL, where public documents, I should say documents were made public in the collusion case being waged between the NFL and their Players Association, the NFLPA, and thanks to Mike Florio and great detective work and reporting by former ESPN employee Pablo Torre, we now have an inside look into the nitty-gritty elements of this case, and two prominent members of the NFL community who both have current and former ties to your Denver Broncos were right at the center of it. The essence of the case waged by the NFLPA, lobbied at the NFL, was that the league's ownership and executives routinely engage in collusion-level activity to help keep the players themselves down and or repressed, especially in a financial context. A lot of this was stemmed in the wake of the, at the time, groundbreaking contract between the Cleveland Browns and Deshaun Watson, which was a fully guaranteed multi-million dollar, $100+ million contract, despite all of the issues off the field that Watson was experiencing after his departure from the Houston Texans. This, according to the case, rubbed a lot of owners the wrong way, and there was collusion to be had between NFL owners and their front offices to try to prevent that kind of contract from ever happening again, and or especially becoming a norm in the NFL the way that it is in Major League Baseball, in the NHL, and in the NBA in a lot of instances. The NFL ultimately won the case, as they ultimately win almost everything that they compete in. But documents revealed that one of the centerpieces of evidence in this case was the Denver Broncos contract negotiations with former quarterback Russell Wilson. There were text messages exchanged during that time and handwritten notes from Greg Penner himself in conversations with George Payton, the current GM, that were used as evidence in this case. Russell Wilson, it was reported in these court documents, after waiving his no-trade clause as a part of the trade negotiations, was seeking a 7-year fully guaranteed contract in the neighborhood of $350 million in total value, which, for the math geniuses out there like myself, comes out to about $50 million per year in average annual value. Fully guaranteed. The Broncos ultimately signed Wilson to a 5-year deal worth around $250 million with $124 million or so fully guaranteed. And they were criticized for that deal. The notes that I referenced from Greg Penner were used as evidence, and the context behind them were handwritten notes that came from a conversation that Greg Penner was having with GM George Payton, who was explaining the parameters and the terms of the 7-year fully guaranteed deal that was being proposed by Wilson's camp. And Greg Penner's notes in handwriting said, in essence, Russell Wilson has 2 years left on his current deal that we're inheriting in this trade. Why not wait? Ultimately, they did not wait to sign Russell Wilson to that extension. He signed it before ever playing it down with the Denver Broncos. But it was not for the 7-year, $350 million fully guaranteed benchmark. And this, to me, this whole collusion case between the NFL and the NFLPA, which was settled in arbitration in favor of the NFL, and the way that it made Greg Penner look for his justified hesitancy to not just hand out a contract extension to Russell Wilson before playing it down for the Broncos, but also not to go to the full extent of a 7-year, $350 million fully guaranteed contract shows me that Greg Penner, before even being approved as a principal owner, let alone the sole decision maker as he is now for the Denver Broncos, has the savviness and awareness that is going to benefit the Broncos from a business perspective and beyond for years and years to come. And I think that has manifested itself in so many instances since Greg Penner has taken the front man role for the Walton Penner ownership group in Denver. And it doesn't really make George Payton look that good. And it really doesn't make Russell Wilson look that good. But I think Greg Penner comes out of this settlement whose notes were not used or were proven not to be an element of collusion in the NFL's case. It makes Greg Penner come out, in my opinion, smelling like roses, and the Denver Broncos, by association, have a future that I think will continue to bloom. Russell Wilson caught some extra strays with some internal division, excuse me, amongst the NFLPA, as NFLPA president J.C. Tretter, who was drafted by the Green Bay Packers and plays currently for the Cleveland Browns, serves as a speaker, voice, figurehead role for the NFLPA, did not have very nice things to say about Russell Wilson, who ended up settling for a lesser deal than the 7-year, $350 million proposed contract. Out of the reporting from Pablo Torre, it has been reported that J.C. Tretter, according to these documents, said this. At one point, he, J.C. Tretter, used an expletive referring to Russell Wilson that I will not say here. J.C. Tretter also called Wilson a quote-unquote wuss. Then he said of Wilson, quote, instead of being the guy that made guaranteed contracts the norm, he's the guy that ruined it for everyone. J.C. Tretter and listen, I am not by and large a Russell Wilson defender. I was more excited or as excited as anyone when the Russell Wilson trade went down a handful of years ago. I thought he was going to finally be an answer at the quarterback position that the Broncos had been searching for desperately since Peyton Manning walked out the door. But he left a wake of destruction, and his failure to live up to the expectation and the value that was placed upon him here in Denver had the potential to set the Broncos back significantly. And it is only by the adept work of Greg Penner and Sean Payton, and even George Payton to a certain degree, post-Russell Wilson trade, that they've been able to maneuver their way out of that relatively painlessly and find themselves as a postseason contender just a handful of years later. I'm not a Russell Wilson defender, but I think for J.C. Tretter to pin all of that magnitude of a decision on Russell Wilson, to say that instead of being the guy who made guaranteed contracts the norm in the NFL, something that only Deshaun Watson and Kirk Cousins had ever experienced at the quarterback position prior to that. And because it doesn't happen for Russell Wilson, he has now ruined it for everyone. And all of that burden is shouldered upon him is crazy to me. That is insane. And I'm sorry, J.C. Tretter, that as a center in the NFL, that you are not in a position to have the level of magnitude that Russell Wilson does. But if you did, I would hope that you would show a little bit more grace than that. And so, again, with this settlement that seemed to come out of nowhere, obviously the case had been reported on and had been ongoing, but the blockbuster nature and some of the dirty nitty-gritty details that we've seen come out of this case, to me, it was so much less about Russell Wilson, who I'm so happy and so ready to turn the page on as a member of the Denver sports community because of the poor nature with which it unfolded. But man, at every single possible turn, I continue to find reasons to have more and more faith in Greg Penner as the figurehead and a principal decision maker for the Denver Broncos ownership group. This transaction moving on from the Broncos trust that was established during the decline of Pat Bowlen and moving forward with Greg Penner is going to pay dividends for years and years to come with the development of a new practice facility that we're going to get a sneak peek of during training camp 2025 as construction will be ongoing, with the renovations that they're going to make with a new stadium, potentially at the Burnham Yard rail development site, and the Denver Waterland that was acquired right next door. The way that they were able to maintain and maintenance things in season, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars with just a couple of weeks left in the NFL season to make sure that the field was in tip-top shape and proper conditions. The savviness from a business perspective and the way that Greg Penner has been able to continue learning more about the nuances of the NFL world has been nothing short of amazing. And the quick turnaround that we are in the middle of experiencing for the Denver Broncos is in large part because of Greg Penner. And the way that these court documents showed that before he was even ratified and approved as an ownership group, and before he was given the title of sole decision maker in the face of this ownership group, Greg was already using those instincts and business acumen to potentially weigh in on major Broncos decisions. I couldn't be happier for it, and the Broncos are going to be fantastically well off as a result. In the world of the NBA, Josh Kroenke spoke to the media yesterday alongside his two co-executive vice presidents, Ben Tenzer and John Wallace, who will be replacing the vacancy left by Calvin Booth. And as a part of that press conference, Josh Kroenke brought up a nightmare scenario, the nightmare on Chopper Circle, that I think is completely unnecessary and unavoidable, but I don't think it was accidental. And that was bringing up the notion of ever having to trade Nikola Jokic. The question was asked of Josh Kroenke about the first and second apron, the tiered apron and luxury tax structure that the NBA has adopted as a part of their new collective bargaining agreement, and whether or not there's hesitancy from the Nuggets ownership group to enter into that second apron, which carries its list of challenges, financial costs, etc. And here's what Josh Kroenke's response basically entailed. Quote, for us as an organization, going into that second apron is not necessarily something that we're scared of. I think there are rules around it that we need to be very careful of with our injury history. The wrong person gets injured, and very quickly you're turning into a scenario that I never want to have to contemplate, and that's trading number 15. Number 15, obviously referring to Nikola Jokic, the greatest basketball player on the planet, the far and away greatest player to ever wear a Nuggets jersey, and the cornerstone with which the future of this franchise is built upon. I don't think there's any scenario at all that would ever warrant trading Nikola Jokic. He brings up injury scenarios, and I'm sure he's referencing there, things that have happened in Milwaukee with the Milwaukee Bucks, where Dame Lillard, who signs a massive extension and is making $60 million a year, tears his Achilles tendon. And now, because of the detrimental nature of the Bucks and the way they crumbled as a result of that, the Bucks are entertaining potentially trading Milwaukee superstar Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is growing frustrated with his current situation after being the person to lead the Bucks to a championship in 2021. And so maybe there's some historical context that Josh Kroenke is toying to there. You can also look at the Boston Celtics, who shipped off two major players of their championship-level core in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis in order to clear under that second apron line that the teams are having to use as a line of demarcation. So the second apron is a boogeyman around the NBA for these NFL owners and governors. And Josh Kroenke saying otherwise feels a little bit disingenuous, in my opinion. But even if you are scared of the monster under the bed that is the second apron, you don't ever, in my opinion, put out into the universe a world where you trade Nikola Jokic to an NBA fan base and an NBA world that just watched Nico Harrison ship Luka Doncic, the franchise cornerstone of the Dallas Mavericks, to the Los Angeles Lakers and completely shatter the core fiber that has held that team together? Why in the world would you ever use that as a launching point for your own franchise? Some people say he was shooting off the cuff. He was, riffing, and it was not a scenario that was gestured in real life. And I actually believe the second half of that. I don't believe there's a world where Josh Kroenke would ever look to or want to trade Nikola Jokic. But the question then remains, why would you say it? And that's why I don't think he was just shooting from the hip or speaking off the cuff. I think that everything Josh Kroenke says in the limited media availabilities that he has made available, although it's been more frequent lately, everything in Josh Kroenke says, in my opinion, is rooted pretty firmly in intention. I don't think he does a lot of ad-libbing as a person of his stature in his position. So why would he say that? I think, and I talked about this with Philip Lindsay and our guy Dante Gomez on the drive yesterday, and Dante brought it up, and I agree. I think that Josh Kroenke was using that narrative, the prospect of injuries within the second apron, forcing the Nuggets to have to contemplate trading number 15, Nikola Jokic, as a boogeyman of his own to get Nuggets Nation, to get the media here in the Denver area and others to stop pushing the narrative that the Nuggets are cheap, that they won't go into the second apron. And he's tired, he being Josh Kroenke, is tired of hearing the criticism and the backlash for something that he thinks the general public and media don't understand. I think it was an intentional decision to frame it that way. I don't think it's ever something that would be rooted in reality. But I think it's a perfect thing to get diehard Nuggets fans and loyalists and media members alike basically a shot across the bow that says, get off my back about the second apron. We're not going to do it. And you don't fully understand it. Because if you did, you wouldn't want us to do it, because injuries could mean that we lose the greatest player in the history of the franchise and I'm forced to trade him. That's not actually the reality of the situation, but I think that's clearly what Josh Kroenke, in my opinion, was trying to push by saying that, rather than shooting from the hip, as some have been clear to try to explain was the case. We will see with the NBA draft tonight what the Nuggets, if anything, decide to do. The Brooklyn Nets have 4 first-round picks, if I'm not mistaken, in the draft. Maybe one of them is for sale. The Nuggets don't have a lot of assets or cash in the coffers to offer if they wanted to buy in. But who knows? Maybe tomorrow we could talk about potential moves that the Nuggets could make to find their way into the second round of the NBA draft, since they're so focused and their messages aligned between Josh Kroenke, Ben Tenzer, and Jonathan Wallace about the core 4 and the starting 5 being one of the better units in the NBA, and it's all about filling in the margins, strengthening the margins. That's the word that kept coming up throughout the majority of that press conference yesterday. And a second-round NBA draft pick profiles similarly to someone you would look to fill a margin. We will see what shakes out tonight, and we will be here back again tomorrow at noon with the latest for you. We'll see you then.
I do what I love.